Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in August. We are doing this video off the cuff, zero prep. Full transparency, I do write full written reviews for every single book that I read, but I always do them a month behind. I do preparation for other things. I don't do prep for this. I am a little bit on a time crunch, so I'm just gonna go. This is one of the best reading months that I have had all year by a couple of different metrics, so let's chat. So in August, I read 12 books for a total of 4,574 pages. That is average for what I've been reading this month in terms of books, but that's actually the second most that I have read in pages. It doesn't compare to previous Augusts because I think last August was like the most I've ever read in one month, so it didn't match that, but it has matched what I've been doing this year, and I have been kind of trying to pump the brakes, not try to read too much in a month. I had an average rating of 4.0. Isn't that beautiful? I have at least one book that I'm planning on giving 5 stars. I have several books that I gave like a 4.5 that honestly could be bumped up later in the year. I had an average page count of 381. I read an average of 147 pages a day. I read 7 books off of my own TBR. I added 3 books to my own TBR. And that means I have an annual net TBR shelf of -12. Looking great. I am worried about the rest of the year though. That number is not low enough. And for star ratings, I did not have anything below a 3-star, and I have finally returned to getting some books that I'm okay giving a 5. Pie graphs, I read a lot of fantasy and general fiction. I read 4 of each, and then everything else was just 1 book. I read 7 physical books and 5 audiobooks, which is a little bit more audiobook leaning than usual. On average, my books were a little bit longer this month, so that makes sense. I read 7 standalone books, 2 first books in series, 1 sequel, and 1 conclusion. And 3/4 of the authors that I read this month were entirely new to me, which has been working out better for me than authors that I've read before, so we're happy with that. Alrighty, so the first book that I read this month was To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monocle Blackgoose. I listened to this on audiobook. This is the first book in a new YA fantasy series called Nampesha Wayasit. So this is a high fantasy, so it is set in a world very inspired by our own in, I would say, Victorian-ish times. Our main character is Anakus, and she lives on this group of islands that have an indigenous inspired culture. About a generation or so ago, the people who come from the main continent came over to her islands and are like, hey, we're actually taking over, we're in charge now. A lot of people were killed. The rest of the world still has dragons around. The indigenous culture has not seen dragons for a very long time, but Anakus ends up coming across a dragon that lays an egg and flies away. She brings this dragon egg back to the village takes care of it together, and it hatches, and it ends up wanting to stay with Anakus. Word gets to the mainland, and people show up and say, you need to come to this dragon academy so that we can teach you how to use the magic. So she has to leave her island for the first time and go to a place where she is completely surrounded with people who have never seen someone like her before, have a lot of propaganda about what her people are like, and don't want her to succeed. I did not know that this book was YA going into it. I thought this was adult, and then like a bit into the book, I was like, you know, this is feeling more like a YA book. The people are teenagers, the language is like not necessarily elevated or whatever, and then I found out it was YA, and I'll tell you, I probably wouldn't have read this if I had known it was YA, but I'm so glad that I did, because this was such a good time. It is talking about serious things, but it was just kind of a breath of fresh air to read, and most of that is because our main character is just a purely good person. Every single adult book has to have a freaking complicated main character, but Anakus is just going to do the right thing no matter what. Every time some sort of injustice happens, she's going to speak up about it. She's going to say how bullshit all the rules are. Why are there people who are considered above my station or below my station? Why can't I date someone who I want? Why do you think that I'm stupid and I can't blah blah blah? This book is fantasy, but so far the fantasy isn't a lot of the plot. A lot of the plot is Anakus trying to get by in this place that does not want her there. She is making friends with a couple of people who are underprivileged, and she gets roomed with the only other girl in her year who is a very privileged girl, and it 100% feels like Elphaba and Glinda. Glinda keeps giving all of these like passive aggressive statements and everything. This girl does not realize that all of the things that she's saying are offensive, but she's trying to be friends with Anakus. And of course, there is a dragon companion. Her name is Kasakwa. I know that there is a description of how she looks in the book, but I am picturing her as the dragon on the cover of the game Vivarium. I do that all the time where I just completely ignore what the author has said a thing looks like, and I'm like, no, I like how I pictured it. I said that the fantasy part isn't necessarily a focus, but I do really enjoy the magic system that they've set up here, because one of the main portions of it is literally just magical chemistry, and I was like, oh my god, I was swooning that this is magical chemistry. They're like, we need to combine a magical substance with 1 part and 2 magical substance with 8 parts, and I'm like, oh my god, they're making water. It was just very charming. And there was also a moment when Anakus finally puts together how her people knew magic that actually had me tearing up in the car. That is like one of the most like perfectly written things, because it does connect with real life indigenous culture. This was such a treat. I am very excited to see more from the series. I do think I would like to see more fantastical plot in the future, and I do think we are primed to see that. And I was just pleasantly surprised that a YA fantasy was super exciting to me. So I have this written down as a 4.25 right now, but honestly, it could go higher. This was such a treat. Next up, I read A Curse Carved in Bone by Danielle L. Jensen. This is the conclusion to the Saga of the Unfated duology. This is a Norse-inspired fantasy romance. Our main character, Freya, is married to a jerk. She has been hiding her whole life that she has a magic given to her by the gods. It's kind of a demigod thing. She is a shield maiden who there is this prophecy that whoever has control of the shield maiden or has them on their side will rule over all of these Norse-inspired lands. One day, the king comes through and her husband and her are fighting and he rats her out. They end up killing her husband. Yay! But then the king, who's old enough to be her dad, is like, you actually have to come marry me. Boo! She also meets a hot guy. Yay! It turns out it's his son. Boo! The king actually says we don't actually have to consummate our marriage because I love my wife. Yay! And then there also seems to be war coming because he wants to try to conquer all these lands. Boo! I read the first book as an art back in 2023 before the book came out. I think it was, to date, my least favorite Danielle L. Jensen book. The magic and the action I was into because the magic kind of felt like a Marvel movie, like Doctor Strange type figures popping up whenever someone was trying to do like a shield or their magic or whatever. It felt cool, but I was not invested in the relationship. I just didn't feel anything there. Going into this book, our character is going to a whole new location. She is trying to decide who to trust. She is also having magical anger issues. I was not tied to the plot of this. I was not tied to the relationship of this. The book kind of started to have interesting villainous characters where it was kind of saying like, oh, power corrupts sort of thing, or like anyone who's pursuing war has brought destruction, like there's no glory in that or whatever. And then the book went straight into a mustache twirling villain. This is the most evil that has ever eviled and you need to kill it now. And I think that's boring. I did like the peeks into Norse mythology that we got, like Yggdrasil, or however you pronounce the tree. And I think I can totally respect the messages around like revenge and anger and everything, but I just don't think that this was emotionally connective, if that makes sense, between the book and the reader as The Bridge Kingdom is. I don't think I liked this as much as book 1 anyway, so I am going to be giving this book a 3-star. Then I read 3 books for my most recent vlog where I read books by authors that are completely new to me that I believed the books were going to be 5 stars. So, maybe not having preconceived notions of the author would pull me to synopses that I was really excited about. So if you want to go watch that now so you can see my thoughts as they develop before I tell you now, you can do that here. The first book I read was Sky Full of Elephants, a book that has come very highly recommended to me me. Two of my favorite booktubers love this. This is by Sibo Campbell. It is a speculative fiction sci-fi book. One ordinary day, all of the white people in America walked themselves into the nearest body of water and drowned themselves. And this takes place 1 year after what the book calls the event. We are following Charlie and Sydney. Charlie is a black man who was in prison at the time of the event, and we shortly find out why he was in prison. But he was released when the event happened because they basically opened up all the prisons, and a lot of the structures of society, banks, huge overarching government, have stopped and have shifted into something that is more local, more egalitarian. He is now a professor at Howard University, and he gets a phone call from a girl who says she's his daughter. And he has known that she has existed. They have never had contact before, and she has been raised by her white mother and her entire extended white family, who do not think well of black and brown people. She believes he owes her a favor, and he agrees to go along with it because he does believe that he owes her his protection. What can I say about this book? This book is so beautifully written. Gorgeous, gorgeous language. Just some of the most visual language that I have read in a long time. Like, it is full of metaphors and similes and all this comparative language that felt like new and just were so good at getting you into the mindset or the situation that the main characters are in. This book does such a good job talking about identity. This book is primarily about the black identity in America. There are specific words that I do not want to use because I think if I get more specific than that, I will give parts of this away. I really enjoyed the way that it like peels back the layers of this speculative fiction. I liked seeing how the world is different and how people are resistant to change because it's the way that it has always been. When there are people who are saying there can be a better way, there's nothing holding us back anymore. And I think that this book goes a little bit farther than a lot of people would expect, and I think that that is fantastic. I really enjoyed our characters. I love the journey that they're on, particularly Sydney, as she has so much internalized racism within her because of the way that she has been raised to tamp down everything about her that is black, and finally getting to see herself in her black identity. And just overall, the idea here, the what if here is, what are black people in America if white people aren't there anymore? What is that identity? And it's our characters finding that out. It definitely got a little bit more speculative than I thought it was going to. The critique that I had is that I feel like we do not get to know our side characters well enough. Kind of wanted more time to get to know individual characters. I don't know. I just think that this would make a perfect mini-series. I want this to be a freaking TV show. If you like books like Who Have Never Known Men or The Memory Police, that kind of speculative what-if fiction, I think this will really resonate with you. This book is one that I'm giving a 4.5 that could be boosted to a 5. Then, not for the vlog, I listened to The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abidare. This is about our main character, who is a 14-ish-year-old Nigerian girl. After her mother dies, her dad is like, actually, we don't have enough money. I'm gonna marry you off to a man old enough to be your dad. And she gets sent off to be the third wife of this old man who has children her age, when all she wants is to go to school. She is absolutely tortured. She is being assaulted by her husband, being mistreated at every turn. She, does not have a clean living situation. In trying to escape, gets sent to be the servant of this woman, but she is not getting paid, is working 1,000,000 hours, and is being beaten and everything. So she is essentially human trafficked into slavery. This book is upsetting. I listened to this book on audio. This is a book that is so popular to listen to an audiobook that audiobook is part of the Goodreads tags because it is done full accents and everything. And I do think that that would be the way to go with this book. I have zero problems with this book. I just don't think it was really what I was looking to read. I'll talk about another one later, but this is the third book in a small amount of time that I read that had to do with child brides, and I was like, man, I can't keep doing this child bride shit. I can't. It's just heartbreaking to read, and it's sad, and you're just wanting her to get out of this situation. It's upsetting to see how our main character is treated, and I did think it was a bit interesting to see how the different characters around, how duplicitous some people are, but also how like layered. There are people who will do terrible things who will turn around and suddenly be kind and not understand that the way that they have treated these two different situations are diametrically opposed, and they don't see the irony in that. If you are looking for a hard-hitting book about women trying to achieve independence and that sort of thing, I think that this is a solid one to read. I basically read this because I needed a book for the Buzzwordathon challenge, and this one had very good high ratings. I do completely understand the high ratings. I think it does exactly what it sets out to do. I read it at a time where I wasn't necessarily in the mood for it. I think I'm giving this book in the realm of a 4. Again, zero things wrong with this book. Then I read The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This is the first in a new trilogy. This is a high fantasy world. This nation, at least, worships these 8 gods called guardians. Each of them are a different animal. The guardians have come to this world 7 times to save humanity, and it is part of the legend that the 8th time they come back, they will destroy humanity. 16 years ago, there was a coup. 8 years ago, the prologue starts. The children of the man who attempted the coup are going up to the emperor, and some terrible things happen, and the main character is asked to do something awful by the emperor. 8 years after that, in the present, the main character, Nima, who is part of the Ravens, she is a scholar, has been elevated from her status in the Raven group to be the high scholar of the emperor. And now the emperor has to step down. There's going to be a competition. All the different guardian groups submit someone to go into a competition to try to be the emperor. During this competition, there is a murder, bum bum bum, and our main character is going to have to solve it, bum bum bum, to save her own skin, bum bum bum. There's so much to like about this book. This is the singular highest rated fantasy book that has come out so far this year. This is a 4.49. The number one thing that I can say about this book is if you have been ever annoyed by info dumps, you are going to be so pleased by how this introduces information. This should be taught to fantasy writers about how to build out your world, and I thought that the way things were slowly introduced to the reader very naturally was just brilliant. I really liked the mystery element in this book. It kind of pivoted away from the murder mystery as it went on. I was a little bit sad because I do think that was one of the strongest elements of the book. There is also a relationship to root for, as our main character has a childhood best friend who in the prologue she was dating, and they have since broken up, and now he has been entered into the competition, and they are having to witness a lot of the same things, and they're often on the same side, but this is not a fantasy romance. I definitely have some questions unanswered, so I'm hoping that the things that I still have questions about are built out a little bit more in the future books. The strongest weakness of this book is the way that the dialogue is written. This book is definitely taking place more in the narration. It is not dialogue heavy. I just don't think that the language of the dialogue kind of lives up to the heightened nature of the prose of the rest of the book. But it absolutely did not ruin the experience of reading this book for me. I am so excited to continue on this series and really excited to push this on other people. And also, it has a very unique narrative style that I won't tell you what it is in case you don't want to know, because I think it's fun to find out. Honestly, this book is going on 700 pages and it could have been longer. Then I listened to Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. This is a translated novel from Arabic. It's actually a novella. It is told in 2 parts. This is a book that you can knock out quickly, but it is going to be hard to do that emotionally. I'm gonna get the details correct. Haha. The minor details. The first part of this book is a fictionalization of the Niram affair, which happened in 1949 when Israeli soldiers gang raped and murdered a Palestinian woman. It is a very cold telling of that. It is told from the perspective of one of the soldiers that did this. And then in the second half of the book, we have a fictional main character who is finding out about this event went and is trying to get more information, and she is trying to travel around the West Bank, but because of who she has very limited ability to move around and get information that people don't want to give out. This is very short, so there's not a lot I can say without, giving some stuff away. It's very hard to read, and I think it is a very important book to be reading right now because it demonstrates how long the Israeli occupation has been, and it is talking about how limited the lives of the Palestinian people have become. It is a state where the lives of the Palestinian people have zero value, negative value, and can be taken for any reason at all. The writing style was interesting, particularly the first half where it feels very distant and cold, and it's done for a reason. I think particularly the way that this book ended is going to leave a mark on people. I think the audiobook was good, wouldn't push you one way or the other, print or audiobook. And what's really interesting about this book to me personally is that a book that I read later this month mentions this book specifically. Definitely recommend you read this one. It is definitely up in the 4+ star range. Then I read Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This is a historical family generational epic that is following a Korean family starting in the 1910s and going all the way to 1989. It is following 4 generations of this family as in the 1930s they end up moving to Japan. Japan in the early 1900s was occupying Korea, and when Koreans were in Japan, they were treated very poorly. There was a lot of racism there. The kickoff of this book is that a young Korean girl, there is a middle-aged man who keeps stalking her essentially. He ends up protecting her from getting assaulted, but uses that opportunity to get close to her, ends up grooming her. She becomes pregnant, and there is a man in his 20s who is coming through, and he is very sickly. The girl's mother and her end up healing him. He finds out that she's pregnant. He proposes a marriage of convenience for the two of them so that she can pass the baby off as his, and that he can have a wife and what societal benefits that will have without worrying that he is leaving a heartbroken widow behind if he dies. So this follows a little bit of the generation ahead of Sunja, the girl who is pregnant. It follows Sunja for a lot of the book, her children and her grandchildren for a little bit of it. This was very beautifully written. What was surprising to me is how domestic this book was. Even though there are big historical events that are going on, we rarely leave the home, and it still feels so rich. If anybody leaves the family center for too long, we don't actually get to see what happens to them. There is a lot of skipping around because this is going to take place over 80 years, so sometimes we skip past a big emotional moment, and it's not until later when people mention it in passing that you even realize it's happened. This talks about the racism that the Koreans experienced. It talks about the occupation, a lot of the sexism that was going on. There's addiction, there's the internalized racism, a lot of different things. And I think one of the things that this book does very well is it portrays these things happening and does not tell you how to feel about them. It is not that these characters ever have a moment of realizing, oh, this thing that happened to me is bad because of this large societal issue. It's not like those historical fictions where the characters are way more feminist and forward thinking or whatever than people in the past would be, and they have this like social consciousness that we as a modern reader have but put into a historical context. Some of these characters deal with trauma for years and years and never really address it, and that's one of the heartbreaking things about this book. However, I would like to say, because the book that I read previously to this had to do with Palestine, there is a comment made in this book about Zionism that I'm torn on how the author was meant it to be read, sort of saying that non-Jewish people who support Zionism do it because they don't want Jews in their country. Fair point, but it completely leaves out the Palestinians from this very randomly inserted conversation. Like, there is no overarching political stuff that is inserted to the book at all, except for this 2-page conversation between two characters we don't like, even though the first third of this book has to do with how the Koreans were being occupied, and it's comparing the Koreans to this occupying force. Do I think that conversation is historically accurate and they wouldn't have been talking about the Palestinians for sure. But I think that comment, either I'm taking it the wrong way or it was absolutely tone deaf and not necessary for the book. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth considering how much I loved the rest of this book. It has been freaking torturing me, that conversation, and so I'm kind of not rating this book. Then we have The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. This is a cozy fantasy. It's a standalone, but it does have a book that just came out like maybe this month that is set in the same world. I don't know how connected they are. Our main character is Tao, and she comes from an Asian-inspired country, and she has lived almost her whole life in a European-inspired country. She has a gift where she can see people's fortunes or possibly like the different paths that they have ahead of them, and she actually has the greater sight where she can see the big moments of people's lives, but because of her past, she chooses not to do this and only tells small fortunes. She is a traveling fortune teller, goes from town to town. She ends up coming across a couple guys on the road. They end up helping her out of a bind. In return, she gives them a small fortune, and she tells one of these men, "You will give your daughter a kitten." And he's like, my daughter has been missing for 6 months. What do you mean? And so the group of them end up banding together, this little found family band, trying to have the fortunes go well and trying to protect Tao from people who would hurt her, as well as trying to find this missing girl. This book is fairly short and also huge, humongous print. You get through it very quickly. Honestly, I think if this book was longer, it would have done a little bit more. I do like the way that this world is set up. I am curious about the larger implications of this world and the magic. I think the idea of telling small fortunes is very cute. I don't think the plot of this book was very strong. There is a redundancy to it of they go to a new town, they kind of have the same experience over and over again. Even though the main plot of this book is supposed to be finding the daughter, there is no progress for so long, which I guess feels realistic, but it just doesn't move anything along. In terms of telling a story, it felt like everything had just stopped. I don't know that I got to know these characters well enough to really buy into the found family aspect of this. If you're looking for something pretty short in the cozy fantasy realm, I would recommend this to you, but this was not my favorite. I just thought that there were a lot of things that could have been executed better. There was also one sequence in the middle of the book that seemed to have absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the book. It has like an entirely different vibe, and I was like, what is this doing here? I don't necessarily feel the need to read the companion to this. Also, Goodreads does not consider this to be a first book in a series, so I'm not either. It was all right. I think I'm gonna get a 3.25. Then I read One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad. This is a part memoir, part politic type book that is talking about living in the West amid the genocide that is happening in Gaza. This is the book that actually mentioned minor detail. So our author has been a journalist for a long time, and he had been put on a lot of journalistic beats for stuff happening in the Middle East, and he is talking about his journey. I think the synopsis calls it like breaking up with the ideals of the West. Western countries such as America, and I think he lived in Canada for a long time, have this idea of freedom, of peace and everything, and in practice they absolutely go against that. They're actually the ones supplying the bombs, and they're telling everyone that the deaths aren't actually that bad, they aren't something you should be worried about. And how much of our society is funding the deaths of other people. I agree with a lot of the ideas that are in this book. I think I did struggle a bit with the formatting. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was a little bit more meandering than I had anticipated. So I think maybe reading this in print might have been a little bit easier for me. This is short. It is very beautifully written. Like, he has a very strong gift with the written word. And I think that he is portraying a lot of the struggle that a lot of people, particularly young people, are feeling in this moment in history, how the world is not the way that we thought it was. This book is a little bit more memoir-y and personal experience than I anticipated, kind of from like the cover and everything, but I think it does a very good job of showing how people will very quickly change what they say because it is what is expected. I think that this gave me a lot to chew on. This is definitely not where I would start if you're trying to learn about Palestine, because it is assuming that you already have a base knowledge. So this is very good. I would recommend it, but not to be the first thing that you read. I really appreciated reading this one, and this is one that I could definitely see myself coming back to. Then we have The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is a romance that is about our main character Clementine, whose aunt has just passed away, and she is living in her aunt's apartment, and her aunt has always said it's magical, and it turns out it's literally magical, and there is a 7-year slip where people from the future or the past will meet in the apartment at the same time. She ends up meeting a man in this apartment and starts to fall in love with him, but doesn't know what to do about it because he is in the past and she doesn't know how to find him. This book could be split in half, a 3-star max book and a 5-star book. I think that this book needed to be like at least 100-page longer. I think that because of the lifting that the author is trying to do in the back half, there was no time to build up the relationship. This is very insta-love. The characters only have a couple of conversations before they are obsessed with each other. The love interest uses very like large, romantic, sweeping language. I was like, I am so uncomfortable right now. I do not know you like that, dude. I think once it got to kind of what the crux of the book was going to be, about that halfway point, I was like, oh, I'm sold on this idea, because I think it does a very good job talking about how people change over time and how that is difficult in relationships because you might be expecting them to stay static when you yourself change. That, cool. I don't buy that these people are in love enough. I was expecting there to be more back and forth of them meeting each other all of the time, and it really only happens maybe 3 times. Like, it's not even that we only see 3 times, it's that it only happens a couple times. I also think there is the grief plot with the aunt. I don't really think that that was built out enough for my taste, and I honestly think the aunt was characterized very stereotypically in terms of just being the like kind of manic pixie dream girl vibe. So there were things in this book that really did not work for me, and then by the end there were some things that really worked for me, but like it didn't fix the things that I didn't love about the beginning. So this is getting a 3.5 from me. Would I read from this author again? If somebody told me that the complaints I have about this book are absolutely not in another one of her books, I would consider it, but this is the only one of her books that I have been crazy excited about because it has to do with time travel, and I did really like how time travel was done in this book. I needed more. You did not give me enough. Then I read Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. You'll notice that I really don't have any yellow left on my shelf, and I'm kind of kicking myself just in terms of decoration for reading this, but I'm not kicking myself for reading this because I was obsessed with this book. I made a little reel. I had no idea what book I was going to end the month with, and I sampled the beginnings of a bunch of different books, and I was only supposed to read a page or so. I actually couldn't put this book down. I just kept reading. I've only read Normal People before, so I didn't really know if that was the best sample size of her work, because I know her other work isn't necessarily rated as well. This is about 2 brothers, Ivan and Peter. They are 10 years apart. Their father has recently passed away. Mostly the 2 of them are grappling with their romantic relationships. Peter, who is the elder one, he's in his 30s, he's a lawyer, and he has this girl who is the love of his life, who he was with for several years, but she was in a car accident that meant that she is constantly in pain. She cannot be physically intimate, and the 2 of them have had this like long-standing sort of relationship where they're kind of domestic partners, but he has gone and found sexual partners elsewhere, and he has now been in a sexual relationship for a while with a girl who is about his brother's age. He is being torn between what he is supposed to do with these 2 women. We also have Ivan. He is in his early 20s. He is a chess player. His rankings have not been very good, and he is wondering if this is the right thing to have done with his life, to try to put all of his chips in one place. And at one of the little events that he does, he ends up meeting this woman who is older than his brother, and the 2 of them start to have a relationship, and they have to kind of keep it secret because of how they think that other people are going to and how people do view their relationship. This book is about the two brothers and their relationship. They meet so few times in this book, but the amount that they're like thinking about each other and are kind of orbiting around each other's ideas. I love Sally Rooney's writing so much. I think she is so talented. Like every time you start one of her books, which do not use quotation marks, sometimes they don't use question marks, and it's just this like stream of consciousness. It takes a minute to get into it, but once you're in it, you're locked in. I just see through these people's eyes so strongly. I really care about all of our characters and wanting everyone to be happy and to find fulfillment, and navigating these complicated relationships healthfully, which is a difficult thing to do. I thought that the characterization of all of these characters was so strong. I felt like I got such a good idea of who they were, and it was interesting to be in the perspective of these people who I can find things that are like objectionable. Like you can see the hypocrisy of a character. You can see when one of these men is not viewing the women as like fully three-dimensional people, and when they finally wake up and everything and realize what they're doing. And we also have the grief of the father looming over the book. It's something that is addressed occasionally, but it is something that is like a piece missing. It's long, but it doesn't feel like it, and I really enjoyed seeing these characters forge relationships and try to find how they can be happy. This definitely did something different than I thought it would, having read only normal people of her work, but I was just enthralled by this. I think that there are people who are going to have a problem with the ending of this book. I was pleased by it, but I had a reservation. I just think that this was so brilliantly written, and it gives such a specific peek into somebody's life. I freaking adore this, and now I'm definitely going to be prioritizing the other Sally Rooney that I have owned for ages and ages. The last book that I read this month was Fever Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the second book in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, which is inspired by pre-Columbian America. In the first book, there is this prophecy that a dark god is going to come on a day where the eclipse is going to happen on the winter solstice. We are following a bunch of characters as they are kind of colliding on one area. They all come from different cultures and everything, and are sometimes on opposing sides. And in this book, big events happened at the end of the first book, and it is fallout from that and sort of setting up the chessboard for what's going to happen in the third book. And I do feel like this kind of had a bit of middle book syndrome. I think more things happened than in Black Sun, but like not enough. This is such an interesting high fantasy world, and we're getting multiple perspectives, but the book's not even 400 pages, so like I don't spend very much time with each of the characters. I think the politics and everything are interesting, but I'm just not getting that good of an idea of the different elements of this book because it's so short, which made me think, you know, maybe I should just like leave the third book alone and not read this anymore. But I did see that the last book has a very high rating, and it is twice the length of the other books in the series. However, it has less than half the readership of this book, which makes me think that the people who didn't really enjoy this book didn't read it, and now the review is a little bit biased. There were characters that I felt very emotionally connected to in the first book that I just didn't really feel that here, and some of the plot lines felt like they weren't super going anywhere. There was a person's plot line that was just like, oh, I want to get to my love interest, and that's their whole plot line. So I'm giving this book like 3.5-ish. So I'm undecided if I'm going to continue on in the series. Please let me know what you think if you have read it. But anyway, those are all the books that I read this month. I am late for a social engagement, and I am so sorry to my friend. I am going to get going. If you would like to find me anywhere, you can find me at the links in the description. If you would like to subscribe, I'd love to have you around. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.